Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. I have got so much I want to talk about today, not all of it directly related to the war in Ukraine. But before we dive into Ukraine, I wanted to kind of share something with you that I saw pop up across my feed here. And that is that Tucker Carlson has done yet another interview, this time with a man by the name of Daryl Cooper. And Daryl Cooper basically is stating that in World War II, Churchill was actually the real villain through all this. He's the one that was pushing for war. He was the one killing all these people. Now, this totally disregards the fact that Churchill was not the prime minister when Hitler started the war. He was definitely not the prime minister when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed. He was not the prime minister at the start of the concentration camps and other things like this. Now, he was unlike Neville Chamberlain, he was definitely opposed to Hitler early on, but he was not in power because Chamberlain was. And the people that were appeasement oriented were the ones in power until I believe it was May 1940. But he actually did say, and I'll just going to go ahead and play the first couple of seconds of this.
I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities. But I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did.
That is the type of thing that we have to watch out for. You see, if you go through all of the material he has gone through, what you find underneath is a Nazi apologist, somebody who said that no, the Holocaust wasn't. He actually said this. Let me see if I can pull that up here. The Holocaust wasn't a horrible accident. Sorry, it was just a horrible accident. The Nazis had a logistical problem with feeding people that they put into their concentration camps. Therefore, they decided it was better to murder them than let them starve to death. And, this is just absurd to put it into the words of the Holocaust, where the Nazis literally, even in the depths of Germany, set up camps with gassing stations and murder pits and the everything to murder people. That is not a logistical problem. That is not a horrible accident. That is deliberate malice. That is deliberate murder and evil. And so I was thinking about this for just a few moments, and I really thought straight to Isaiah chapter 5, specifically verse 20, 21, and 23. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight, which justify the wicked for reward and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. I am not going to claim that Winston Churchill was the perfect man. The man had many vices and many problems and probably made a ton of mistakes. But when you're faced with an enemy that is marching across the nations of Europe, that is murdering people left, right, center, that has shown no indication of any intention of stopping anytime soon, whose only reason for even offering Britain an opportunity for a peace agreement at all was to keep Britain off the battlefield and therefore preventing them from causing problems for him. A man whose word was so worthless that even though he had that Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Russia, he went ahead and tore it up and launched a surprise attack on the Russians. Now, admittedly, that was his downfall, but still, this is a man to whom a peace agreement meant nothing. And therefore, we have now gotten into the era when people are calling good evil and evil good. I just cannot believe that I have to sit here and say that Hitler was the bad dude. That doesn't make Winston Churchill perfect. It merely means that he fought against the bad dude. And I shouldn't have to say that out loud, ever. Therefore, if you are not familiar with World War II, if you've not spent some time studying it, if you've not seen what happened, I encourage all of you to do that research, to spend some time in the histories and learn. Because if you don't know it personally, if you don't have that personal relationship with the truth and a firm conviction of what you know, then people like this Daryl Cooper can turn your head. Therefore, know the truth so you can know when you are being deceived. That's what I kind of wanted to open with right there. So I apologize for starting off with a scriptural thing here, in the sense of that's not typically what I do, but I saw this and I just could not let this stand unchallenged, at least from a position where I could see, where I have seen this coming across. Believe what you wish about Tucker Carlson. The man is platforming people that are calling evil good and good evil. By the way, let's go ahead and say hello to everybody here. Glad to have you on board. Al, glad to have you. Man, myth, legend. Yes, I am. I am very amazing. No, not really, but I'm glad to have you here. Hi, Lucille and Jerry and Ozzy. Glad to have you all here. Sorry it's been so long. Work has been busy. And let me tell you, when you've had a good long day at work and you've been out sweating in the hot sun, well, you get pretty darn tired at the end of that day. So it's been a challenge. I've been tracking what's going on, but having the time to compile it has not been there. So thank you for joining me again. Glad to see you all here. And absolutely thank you. Thank you very much. Lucille states, don't apologize for quoting the Bible. It's foundational. We need it. Thank you very much. I'm not apologizing for quoting the Bible. It's just unusual for my stream. So that it struck me so hard. And I felt it in my very soul. And I felt those words. So just wanted to share that with you. Let's go ahead and continue on. This is kind of what I wanted to start as my introduction rather than what I just did. From Alex Plitzas, every time I read an argument advocating for isolationism in the face of violent fascist imperialism, it reminds me of this quote: "The price good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men." Or as Igor Sushko states, it is the collective Free West's responsibility to safeguard weaker and smaller democracies from stronger and bigger genocidal dictatorships. If we don't, we risk losing our own democracies over time, because dictatorships will grow in power and destroy us from within. And that is exactly what we see happening in the world today. We are seeing repeated signs of dictators taking the opportunity when they see the West is weak to jump in there and take what they can, and take more, and take more, and dare the West to do anything about it. Because here in the West, well, we don't really like that whole war thing. It's not really what we want. We want peace. Especially when somebody's waving their nuclear pickle around. And that puts us in a pickle of dealing with, will we let nuclear threats actually work in this modern era? Because if they do work for dictators, that is the end of freedom across the world. Because the longer we let it happen, the more likely we are to find ourselves at the wrong end of that nuclear threat. One of the constants of this world is that appeasement only emboldens the enemy and brings more war. Always. While the West frequently sits on its own hands, the Russian-Iranian axis wins breathing time, unnecessarily prolonging the war. And this is discussing, from Tindar, the expectation that Iran is going to ship missiles to Russia imminently. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit here. Let's go ahead and get past the intro here because honest to goodness, it burns me that we have not learned anything. That when a dictator wants and we appease, the dictator takes and takes. Give him an inch, takes a mile. Give him a kilometer, he takes 100. All right, so some of the big news that's happened over the last couple of days, there was a simply massive Ukrainian drone strike on Russia that struck facilities well into the Moscow Oblast. Within, I think it was, there was reports that there was a building 3 kilometers from the Kremlin that was burning, which may or may not have been hit by a drone. It was a military facility. There was also an oil refinery within 15 kilometers of the Kremlin that was hit and was burning. There was another facility, I think it was about 25 kilometers away, all over. And of course, this is a broad drone strike. This is probably over 100 drones involved in striking facilities across the western parts of Russia. In fact, the Konakovo power station outside of Moscow was one of those targets. It was Russia's 8th largest thermal power plant. Now, this was as of 3 days ago. So this is kind of getting information that's a little bit older now, but that was a massive drone attack. And this is that Moscow oil refinery, which was set ablaze. Somebody put up a picture of just a normal burn happening, have the flare burn thing going on, saying it was that. Nope, this is more reality here. The Kaputnya oil refinery is one of the few industrial facilities still in Moscow's vicinity. It's only 16 kilometers from the Kremlin and is what was attacked. Tindar states they thought it was funny that they were checking out that plant just a few days ago, saying, well, that is a nice target. You can see some of the damage at the Konakovo power plant, which looks like it was extensive fires. This is just part of the damage we're seeing, so this is only just a portion of it. It was clearly a very extensive amount of damage to the facility, and doggone it, it seems like turnabout's going to become fair play. From the Dmitry at War Translated, I think that should get it. 158 drones were shot down over Russia tonight, including over Moscow. Of course, the Ukrainians will be smiling and happy. They're already attacking our country in large numbers, more often than we are attacking them. And these are just drones, and we are still putting up with it and putting up with it. This is not how it works, friends. This is not how wars are won. So Russia's having to take a little bit of their own medicine. I think some cod liver oil coming down pretty soon here. The other end of that particular stick, well, just yesterday, there was a strike on what was called an educational facility, and it is an educational facility. It is, however, also a military educational facility in Poltava with 2 ballistic missiles, hypersonic ballistic missiles. The initial reports were 41 dead and at least 180 wounded. The facility struck was a communications education center and a nearby hospital. Now, I've been trying to gather the information here as President Zelensky did address this attack, stating that had received the preliminary reports with the information stating there were 2 ballistic missiles that hit the territory of the educational institution and the nearby hospital. One of the buildings of the Institute of Communications was partially destroyed. People were found under the rubble. More than 180 were injured and 41 as of this point in time. There's an investigation into what's going on, but we're getting some additional information as we go. I can kind of move through some of this stuff. Now, this one was an interesting declaration right here. A lot of times we see on the Russian side, the Ukrainians will strike formations of Russian soldiers that are standing around waiting for a speech or for training, some kind of formation along those lines. And initially, people were talking about this were This was like a formation, like a parade formation where they were supposed to be getting a speech or something. That is not the case. That was not the case at all. There was none of that. The radio personnel, and as Ozzy just pointed out, these are electronic warfare training servicemen who were killed. They were there for training. It was a normal day for training, um, and so what happened is, and I'm kind of summarizing here, there were hypersonic missiles. So the normal air raid alert that went out was extremely late. No, late from the perspective of probably when they detected it, but the missiles were fast enough that they struck as people were heading for shelter. Therefore, the deaths and injuries are probably far higher than they would normally be if it had not been a hypersonic missile that was used in the attack. They do report that, like, for instance, this individual states that their family member was there at the time of the impact, and he's now in an intensive care unit, covered with blood, sedated most of the time. No clue if he'll survive. The death toll rose to 51. I believe the ending number was 53. A little bit of information from Ozzy. As he spoke with people on the ground, there were Ukrainian servicemen there receiving electronic warfare training. The guy he spoke with said that the war has gone on. They all tend to ignore air raid alerts. Some shelter, but he and others sometimes go about normal life. Normalization. And in this case, normalization means death. I'll play a few seconds of this CNN report here, just a very brief little bit of it.
80 have been injured in that attack. The details that we're getting so far, they are pretty scant, but we are getting some apparently, and this is according to the Defense Ministry of Ukraine. The Russians used 2 ballistic missiles to hit that military educational facility. Which apparently in this attack, the telecommunications institute of that facility was partially destroyed. Now, what the Ukrainians are saying is that the time between the air raid alerts that went off and those missiles hitting was so short that many people were simply caught off guard as those missiles hit while they were trying to get to safety, trying to get to bomb shelters.
Don't want to do much more than that, just because of because it is CNN, and I don't want to be on the bad end of their particular stick. So overall, though, this is the situation as best I understand it at this point. The recovery efforts were carried out nearly immediately. Many dead, as has been reported. No, he said UA servicemen. That'd be you. That's UA is the short 2-letter code for Ukraine. A German opposition leader, Friedrich Mutters, stated that these are no normal acts of war. These are the severest forms of war crimes against the civilian population of Ukraine. This is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is an illegal war of aggression by Russia against a population which never posed a threat. We hesitated too long and started helping Ukrainians way too late. We are now in a situation where we have to help Ukraine even more. I expect from Chancellor Scholz that he relays a clear message to all those who still believe that this problem can be solved through ingratiation and diplomacy. This problem will only be solved when Putin is faced with the futility of winning this war militarily. We are far from this point. We have imposed unnecessary restrictions on Ukraine when it comes to the usage of weapons on Russian soil. This was wrong from the start. Ukraine must be capable to destroy Russian logistic lines, even on Russian soil. If Ukraine is not allowed to do so, it would be as if one hand is bound behind its back. Additional information where I mentioned there was no drills, that type of thing. So, just kind of giving it some additional there. As of this final release, this report, they said the death toll had risen to 52. Again, I've seen 53 elsewhere, with 13 people still under the rubble as of this morning on September 4th. Ozzy gave some additional clarification on his source. Greg Terry, U.S. citizen, just received Ukrainian citizenship. He's a pastor with decades of experience in Russia and Ukraine. Very good. Good solid source. You got good sources, Ozzy. That's all I'm going to say. You got the goods. Let's go and move on to news out of Ukraine after that kind of information about Poltava. This is a fun little modification of a BMW 5 Series. They took 3 of the tubes off of a Grad launcher, mounted them to the back of this the BMW 5 Series. Here's some video of that car in action, launching some of the those Grad rockets off into the distance. These are not guided munitions. These are dumbfire munitions. You'd be wanting to area effect as much as possible. Of course, when you're firing at the Russians over in an area, should be pretty easy to use these things. Basically, bombardment technique. There is a pretty big shakeup going on in the senior leadership in Ukraine at this moment. Several resignations have been registered, and likely many of these people will be moved to new positions in the government, sort of like the general who's now the ambassador, Zaluzny. There we go. Name just went poof for a second. But Zaluzny ended up being the ambassador to the UK. And now Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is also tendered his resignation. There is an expectation that he'll probably end up working more towards finishing up the NATO business, getting Ukraine into NATO and getting that being his focus from there on out. Here's his actual resignation letter. Vladimir Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, stated that it's possible that that there's no way that these will reshuffle. These reshuffles have any impact on the prospects for resuming normal negotiations. See, now this President Zelensky, I am reading that, Ozzy, and I will take a look at it. If you've got his do you have a link to his YouTube channel, or at least his on YouTube name? Drop that in there too. Ukraine needs new energy, President Zelensky said of the government reshuffle, and the reshuffle is needed to strengthen the country, according to him. So how that's going to work out, it'll be interesting to see play out in the end. We'll have to keep an eye on it. The Strategic Industries Minister Alexander Kamyshin stated that during his tenure, the wartime production had tripled in 2023 and doubled again in 2024, making it 6 times the original size. 534 days ago, he said, I was appointed as the minister. My task was clear: to restart the ministry's operations according to wartime realities. And it's clear that he did some pretty good stuff on that regard. Now, President Zelensky also addressed talks about POW exchanges. All these moral talks about exchanging everyone for everyone do not work with the Russians yet. What works is that in the Kursk region, we have captured more than 600 people, and we will exchange 600 people. That is a fact. Even the Islamic Cultural Center of the Spiritual Administration of Muslims of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea in Kyiv sustained significant damage as a result of Russia's attack last night. A little more context, there was another significant missile attack on Kyiv and other areas of Ukraine last night. 2 nights ago. And this is some of the damage from it. Then, of course, Russia has been putting out this video of an alleged attack on a Ukrainian military column that they did. They even used an Iskander missile on it. Turned out, grain trucks. Yeah, grain trucks. Well, you know that Russia's been very aggressive about attacking food sources. To call it a military column, though, really, come on, Russia. Indeed, yes, yes, true. That's true, Ozzy. Okay, I will pay attention to that, and I I definitely will take a look at that. Sorry, I'm just spending a moment reading about the Greg Terry experience there. So I'll check that out. Thank you. Now, this I found interesting. Hundreds of people in the occupied areas of Ukraine now serve Ukraine. The GUR officer of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, with the call sign Ulster, who coordinates the underground in the occupied territories, spoke about the peculiarities of this work in an interview. So there is an underground partisan movement taking place even in the areas that are occupied by Russia. And the odds are, if you're seeing hundreds of people joining, that there's thousands or even tens of thousands that would, if they thought they could get away with it. The French resistance was not all of France. It was not every Frenchman. But the active participants, few though they may have been, were a huge part of keeping France from falling entirely to the German warfare, German control. Just a quick note from Defense of Ukraine. The Russians have been shelling their cities for days in a row. The missile attacks on our cities and people show the enemy's terrorist nature. Long-range capabilities to strike on military facilities inside Russia are needed now. It is of utmost importance to halt the Russian terror and protect lives. Or as the other way to state it is, you spend a whole lot of time stopping arrows. Wouldn't it be better to kill the archer, the guy who's shooting at you? Makes a lot of sense to me. And Ukraine has announced that they have carried out the successful first test of its first domestic-made ballistic missile. This is the interesting thing here to me is that as the West has said, no, you can't use our stuff for that, Ukraine said, okay, then we'll make our own. And they've designed and built and created things that can reach out farther and farther, and putting in military capabilities so that they can protect their country and reach out farther and take out the Russians that are attacking them. Interesting to see, and it's part of the, I hate to say it this way, it's part of the desperation of being at war. They've got to do everything they can to win. Let's move over to the news out of Russia for a little bit here. As we do, I'm going to pause and just read this here. It is inspiring to realize that many are willing to risk their own lives to preserve the freedom of others. That's from Lucille. Thank you very much. It's true. And, the people who have gone to Ukraine, they didn't need to, they didn't have to, but they wanted to. They felt the call to. And they went there to, as Ozzy states, no greater love, for their laying down their lives for their friends, sometimes friends they barely knew, but still. Moving over to Russia here. From Ivana Strodner, if you naively believe that that after Putin, Russia will become more democratic, please read the strategy for Russia's youth policy until 2030. And it's a very nationalistic, militaristic type of thing, trying to develop their talents to be better soldiers and this type of thing. There's a lot to it. Just understand that nationalism in the cause of righteousness is not a bad thing. Nationalism in the cause of evil is. For the partisans who've been torching things on railroad relay cabinets, have been caught and are now being taken to prison. They could face up to 20 years in prison for torching Russia's infrastructure. A fuel truck blew up on the M11 highway in Kalininsky district, Tver region. This is not reported as either partisan or drone action. I would like to find out more, but this is interesting that it would be that it would go up. Random fuel trucks don't tend to go up without reason. Just say it. 2 Mi-8 helicopters crashed in the span of just 4 days in the far east Kamchatka and on the border of Irkutsk and Buryatia today. This is not close to the war zone. Is it constant lack of funding for the maintenance of their helicopters? Is it partisan action? Did Ukraine sneak some drones right up to these guys? I don't know. But it is 2 helicopters crashed in just 4 days. This Russian colonel talked about sending all of this mobilized soldiers to war in Ukraine and these meat assaults, as we like to call them, and getting awarded a Hero of Russia medal for it. Well, the widows of one of those dead soldiers now is, basically saying, let's prosecute this guy for mass murder and the genocide of the Russian people. And if one widow's saying it, 10,000, 100,000 more might be thinking it, especially when they see this colonel or the other officers bragging about sending their loved ones right into a meat assault with the expectation that they were going to die, while he sits back at the headquarters sipping his vodka and staying out of danger. This could get messy if it keeps up. The Russians love to declare various fake propaganda stories about taking out Ukrainian forces. In this case, they tried to pass this one off as happening in the Kursk area, showing that the Russians were kicking those Ukrainians right out of Kursk. And let me give you some background here. First, they gave the full picture. You can see it's kind of blurred right here. And somebody geolocated the footage and said it was here instead. Then they did another version of it with the background blurred. And somebody actually looked at the reflection in the sensor of the camera and geolocated the footage based on the reflection in the sensor. So if you're honest to goodness, there's so many capabilities now. If you're going to put something out there and there's anything at all wrong with it, it's going to be found out, and you're going to get called out for it. So interesting, just fascinating from a technical standpoint that these geolocators are able to use everything that they can to peg down even just the pixel level of the reflection off the camera to be able to determine where it is. Absolutely amazing work to determine that this is actually done in Donetsk, not in Kursk. Ukraine is not responsible, at least not yet, for everything burning in Russia. This is another fire in dense river reeds, which routinely happens in Russia. Somebody probably threw a cigarette out of their car window, causing the fire. But just lots of fires to be watching out for in Russia. A lot of times they're not able to respond with a full fire crew or even at all because a lot of the men were sent to Ukraine instead. We mentioned a week and a half ago, I think it was now, that Ukraine had hit the oil depot in Poltava. It had been burning at that point at least 8 days. Now it's 16 days later. They've finally gotten the fire out. There's likely many hot spots, could still be going for a while. This was as of 2 days ago. It's not popped up again, but clearly it took them a long time to get that fire out, and probably mostly because all of the fuel burned up. There was an ammo cache in Bakhmut, emphasis on the word was. It was taken out in a storm shadow strike. You can see the results of a storm shadow in the middle of a Russian ammo depot. Quite impressive destruction. Vladimir Putin has been watching what's been going on in Kursk and states that normal life will return to the border regions of Russia so that their kids can go to school again. Now, as Dmitry at War Translated states, he started a war, killed hundreds of thousands of people, his own and others, and now he's just promising a normal life. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you. Always glad to have you on board. I know you're busy today, so if you have to bail out, I'll understand it. But glad to have you here. I enjoyed that video you shared earlier. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to prep it for today's stream, but thank you. I really appreciate it. Russian media are reporting that Russian priests drove around areas in Bryansk region that border with Ukraine and prayed about saving our fatherland and native Bryansk region from enemy invasion. I thought, and as Anton Hilderschenko pointed out as well, look at the colors. Yellow and blue. Interesting. I thought those colors were banned in Russia, especially in combination. Still, the fact is that they've got these priests driving around blessing the area to try and keep those Ukrainians from coming in and invading the land. Well, they wouldn't need to if they would stay in their own. Russia attacked Kyiv with a new 48 N6DM missile, which is actually an anti-aircraft missile from the S-400 system. Now, when they're used in this ground-to-ground attack role, they're really low accuracy. They're just, they've got bunches of little shrapnel bits in them packed around a warhead, and of course, those exploding would do a lot of damage to civilian infrastructure and civilians. Just saying. But they're very inaccurate in this way and tend to just hit whatever in the area. However, the fact they're using their top-of-the-line S-400 system for this role really should tell you how ineffective it's been in its intended role of being anti-air. It's obviously not doing the job if they're wasting the missiles on ground attack missions. This is from about 3 days ago now, and this is a Russian power plant in the Tver region, and they struck it as well. There have been a lot of people screaming about Ukraine striking power plants and oil facilities. In fact, do I still have it? No, I have it somewhere. I might have it later. If I do, I'll share it with you then. It was a U.S. congressional hearing talking about this. Why the U.S. is complaining about Ukraine striking oil facilities and power plants when Russia's been doing that to them. If I've got it, I'll share it later. In the new year, the Russian education system in Crimea has introduced disciplines related to ideological education. Crimean students will be offered 2 new subjects: Fundamentals of Security and Defense of the Motherland, with the module Fundamentals of Military Training, instead of the subject Life Safety, and the discipline Labor instead of Technology. Or as the Ministry of Defense of the UK states, as the school year begins across Russia, the Russian state is introducing and funding a new military training module. The module is part of a new program called Foundations of Security and Defense of the Motherland for 15 to 18-year-olds. The course has 11 modules requiring 68 teaching hours. The course will cover a range of topics, including combined arms combat and small arms familiarization. It is aimed at forming values, acquiring knowledge and skills that ensure readiness to fulfill the constitutional duty to protect the state. The program seeks to create and will likely result in a more militarized and security-focused society. The new youth strategy, which was approved by the government in August 2024, aims at raising the prestige of military service, instilling patriotism and civic duty responsibility, but primarily prepare pre-conscription age teenagers mentally and physically for military service. There is additionally an increase in the number of summer camps for children which engage in various military activities. The strategy notes that in the last 30 years, youth values had shifted from collectivism to individualism and from statism to cosmopolitanism. It claims that the ideological expansionism of Russia's geopolitical competitors had led to the weakening of traditional values and growth of individualism. Heaven forbid that you should have some individualism. Oh, that is such bad things for those Russians to have, individualism. That sturdy individualist thing. The new strategy aims to reverse that process with the militarization of youth as an integral part of that process. I can't even really speak about this at all. I mean, it's all obvious, laid out right there. It's all about being too individual and not enough collectivist, not communist enough, and getting to uh, wise to the ways of the world, I guess you might say. So therefore, Russia instead wants to create, instead of rugged individualists, kind of like we create here, um, they want to create capable military drones, just human ones. Let's move over to the international front, and boy, do I have a bunch of stuff on this one. A lot of it just tangentially related. Let's dive right into it. You got a lot to cover here. A lot of people have been talking about how Serbia is giving up on Russia. They're going to come to the West. No. In fact, Vladimir Putin and the Serbian deputy prime minister met. In fact, I think I have some more on this right here. Yes, that was meeting tomorrow. Do I have the next piece? There's got something here. Oh, come on. I got it here somewhere. There we go. See, there was then, of course, Serbia announcing a $3 billion deal to buy 12 French warplanes, which is what they say was the reason they say they're getting away from Russia instead of buying Russian warplanes. I think it has more to do with the fact that Russia doesn't have any to sell. But this is not a shift away from Russia. This is just basically making it so they can keep up appearances. Oh, come on. I've got to have it here somewhere. I'm going to quickly skim through this to find what I'm looking for. Please feel free to talk amongst yourselves. This is it right here. Let me move this over here so I don't get it confused for anything else. Today, this would be from September 4th today, Putin met with the Serbian government, which said that Serbia will never become a NATO member under Vučić. Serbia is Russia's strategic partner and will never impose sanctions on Russia. Now, this balancing strategy that Vučić is trying to pull off doesn't bode well for Moscow. He does mention that their gas contract does expire soon. So that will be renegotiated under, shall we say, favorable conditions for Serbia. Still, this does not mean that Serbia is leaning away from Russia. It just means that Serbia is looking for where they can get their next paycheck from. And if they can get it from both sides, they're even happier. This article I caught the other day was actually really good. And I'm just going to post this link here for you guys to check out at your leisure, where it talks about Swiss security experts proposing rethinking their neutrality. That's 500 years of neutrality that Switzerland has held, that they're now rethinking entirely and proposing closer ties with NATO and the European Union. It takes a lot to get the Swiss to actually seriously consider this. I mean, think about the pressures that a nation like Switzerland has to be under for them to actually take those steps, even talk about the potential for not being neutral anymore. That's because they recognize the real threats that are coming their way. And they don't really want to be at the, shall we say, pointy end of those particular problems. Romania's parliament approved the donation of one of its 2 operational Patriot SAM systems to Ukraine. I believe, and I'm going from memory here, that donation was actually approved, but don't hold me to that one. I have not got that actually in my stuff. The U.S. is reportedly close to an agreement to provide Ukraine with AGM-158 JASSM air-launched stealth cruise missiles. Now, these will be able to reach quite deeply into Russia. So are they going to also come with the ability to use against Russian targets well behind the front lines, like airfields that launch bombers and supply depots? I'll believe it when I see it. Georgia's been doing all kinds of crazy things. They've got a pro-Russian government there these days. The people of Georgia seem to be not very happy with it. But, just like everything else, they've been rising up and protesting. But as long as they aren't taking armed control of the country, the government's going to keep doing what the government's going to keep doing. And therefore, the European Union has announced that Georgia's accession talks have been, suspended. They're not going to be joining the European Union anytime soon, and when they're still basically playing to Russia's fiddle. President Putin made a visit to Mongolia. Now, there's a bunch of caveats and what's it's about this. Hi, Kat. Number one, it's believed that it was actually one of the doubles, not Putin himself. But he made the visit, either Putin or his double, on in order to talk about the Power of Siberia pipeline that they were trying to get Mongolia to sign off on. He made their visit, but the thing is, Mongolia is a signatory of the necessary treaties that they would have to arrest him and send him to the International Court of Justice. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And now people are like, dang, damn it, what an opportunity. Why'd you skip out on that? I think I've got this later, but I'm going to summarize it now. It turns out that Mongolia gets something like 95% of its oil and gas resources from Russia. If they arrest Vladimir Putin, you can say say goodbye to all that. And this is a cautionary tale about being independent in some way. Now, Mongolia doesn't have a whole lot of options. I believe they're entirely surrounded by Russia on one side, China on the other. There's not much to work with there. But they didn't arrest Putin. And I can see why. It would have been hilarious if they had. There were protests, in fact. There were citizen protests that the Mongolian police had to clear out of the streets so they could welcome Vladimir Putin in. But overall, yeah, they didn't do it. As Aussie states, landlocked Mongolia is in the IWC, International Whaling Commission. Mongolia has bad geography, borders only People's Republic of China and Russia. Mongolia is pretty good as a democracy, but awful geography. Yeah, exactly. They got nasty people on both sides. Now, I mentioned a while back how Russia had been sending oil to India, and India had been basically banking their rupees. They were not going to pay for it in rubles or anything else. And so they were banking a bunch of rupees in India. Well, Russia finally figured out how to use those rupees that they had been banking in India to buy dual-use goods from India, sort of bypassing necessary treaties in that regard. Sanctions, I mean. Moving over to U.S. news, and I have not had a chance to dive deep into this one. So bear with me as I try to just go with what we've got. 4 U.S. citizens and 3 Russian citizens go on trial for working for the Russian FSB. Their goal was to sow civil discontent and shred our social fabric. Evidence includes FSB internal reports, which means our government believes disclosure will not jeopardize collection sources and methods. And these are the people that are being sued in the United States District Court, Middle District of Florida, Tampa Division. And this is the people here. I'm not going to bother reading the names. Number one, I don't think I can get through them without laughing. But the really funny part is this part, 18 USC 951. 18 USC being a spy and being obvious about it. I thought that was hilarious. And Eric Garland here underneath says, I think it may be the first time FSB internal reports have been in open court like this. There are relatively few prosecutions of this type. I thought it was hilarious. By the way, this should show you that Russia is absolutely intending to overthrow us from the inside. Russia often makes the claims that we're trying to do it to them. Probably. We're just crappy at it. But they have been really good about managing to get inside the U.S. and use our freedoms against us. Yes, this is the video I wanted to share with you guys earlier.
When the Ukrainians hit Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, the Biden administration came out and condemned the Ukrainians for hitting Russia's oil and gas infrastructure and suggested that they should not do that again. Can you tell me why, while Russia is attacking Ukrainians' oil and gas and energy sector, why shouldn't the Ukrainians attack the Russian oil and gas and energy sector?
The issue on attacking critical infrastructure is when those are civilian targets, we have concerns because Ukraine holds itself to the highest standards of observing the laws of armed conflict, and that's one of the elements of being a European democracy.
But the Russians are attacking the oil and gas infrastructure in Ukraine, correct?
Absolutely.
And if you're going to win a war, you can't sit back and take punches and not deliver punches. So why shouldn't the Ukrainians attack the oil and gas infrastructure in Russia?
Congressman, we have concerns about striking at civilian targets when we support countries. Again, this is Ukraine's sovereign decision, but we express those concerns.
But those oil and gas infrastructures in Russia are owned by the Kremlin, correct? It's not like they're owned by a private corporation that have shareholders and private assets are being destroyed.
They are owned by private Russian citizens who are part of the Putin regime. That is correct.
I mean, it makes sense to me that we should destroy them.
Found the microphone. You don't have to tell me. I thought that was an interesting exchange right there. And the fascinating bit to me, I think it shows that we're not serious about this war in the West. Seriously. I think we are not taking it seriously. If we had to deal with this day in, day out, there wouldn't be a facility in Russia that would be operational. We might avoid civilian casualties as much as possible, but there wouldn't be oil, there wouldn't be gas, there wouldn't be electricity. Those facilities would be dead. And tying Ukraine's arms, hands behind their back, seems to me that we are not taking this seriously. And I can't say it any other way. Not related to the war in Ukraine, but interesting nonetheless. Senior enlisted personnel on USS Manchester secretly installed a Starlink dish and a private Wi-Fi network on board to check sports scores, text home, and stream movies. This is also a great way to reveal your position to the enemy at all times. Not the smartest thing I've ever seen. There was some disciplinary action carried out, but not exactly extensive. This is far more serious than even this short post is leading us to believe. Then, of course, there's Taiwan, whose chief executive, let me pull up this original deal here, said that if China's claims to Taiwan relate to territorial integrity, the Chinese authorities should also return the lands given to Russia in the 19th century. They're referring to Primorsky Krai, the parts of Khabarovsk Krai, and the Amur region. Why not return the lands occupied by Russia under the Treaty of Aigun? Russia is very weakened now, isn't it? The Taiwanese leader noted that the PRC does not want to attack Taiwan at all for territory. He said China actually wants to change the international order and achieve hegemony in the international arena in the Western Pacific. They want world clout. If it was really about territory, they would be after this stuff from Russia. The whole thing with Taiwan is basically forcing the world to bow to their whims. and nothing more. I already talked about the JASMs here. Moving on. Also outside of Ukraine for a little bit here, Houthis down in Yemen have attacked 2 crude oil tankers. I mentioned this one because the loss of 2 more oil vessels is going to cause some ripple effects on the oil industry, and therefore, put it simply, could the rising challenges with delivering oil would cause the value of crude oil to go up, and therefore Russia would benefit by having a higher price for their crude oil. So I could absolutely see them being involved in this as well. Iran is definitely the backer of it, but I could also see Russia supporting it as well, potentially. Ukraine, as I mentioned earlier at the start of this, is expecting Iran to ship more missiles to Russia imminently in order to carry on their bombardment of Ukraine. As Glasnost states, Putin's desperate to keep air bombardment of Ukraine going. So European officials expect Iran to deliver ballistic missiles to Russia imminently. Such a move may finally prompt the U.S. and other allies to greenlight the use of their long-range missiles to attack targets in Russia. Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to find out the hard way, one way or the other. We've already got Ukrainian Shaheeds attacking Ukraine regularly. And now we've got North Korean KN-23s, I think they are, also falling on Ukraine. The only thing that's missing is permission to shoot back. Already talked about that. President Zelensky held a meeting with the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The main focus of the talks was on strengthening nuclear safety in Ukraine, ensuring constant monitoring not only of the state of nuclear power plants, but also of the substations critical for their operation. This is going to be a challenging talk no matter what. And Ozzy, you are correct. Escalation whisperers. It's the policy advisors who talk of escalation management that are the issue. Escalate to what? They think they delicately manage an important issue, not realizing there is no issue. Escalate to what? Minister of Foreign Affairs Margus Tshaka stated that Hungary, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, is not acting like most Western countries regarding Russia's aggressive war in Ukraine, and even suggested that in this conflict, Hungary might be on the side of the enemy. And this, Viktor Orban has been showing signs of being on Russia's side all throughout this conflict. He's another one like Vucic trying to walk a tightrope between the two. And I think he's going to find that increasingly difficult. As people notice, the behavior of Orban brings no benefit. Our policy remains unchanged, but he has managed to block quite a few important decisions. For example, regarding the allocation of funds from the European Peace Facility. However, we are still able to find a solution and transfer $1.5 billion from the profits of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. But of course, such actions with completely different rhetoric that Orban allows himself certainly do not make us stronger. Let's just say that it appears that Russians have Trojan horses in the European Union. In that same vein, for the first time in almost 2 years, EU countries purchased more gas from Russia than from the USA in a single quarter. From April to June, the EU bought 12.7 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia, compared to 12.3 billion cubic meters from the USA. They're funding the war. That's what they're doing. From journalist Jason J. Smart, Chinese-Russian partnership. Chinese banks refuse to accept funds not only if they come from Russia, but even if the payment documents contain Russian names. China's looking out for their own interests. That's simple. If they think they can keep their revenue coming in from the United States, from other Western nations, by toying with Russia for a little bit through banking, they're going to do it. Russia looks at their bottom line, not the world's. Just a quick note here from BBC Russian. Chinese spy found in New York State government and has been charged. The Chinese are in the middle of infiltrating everything as well. Russia has done it for decades. China has been doing it for a long time as well. They want their agents in place. Nothing more, nothing less. Lithuania has been watching the situation and finally started installing dragon's teeth on the border with Kaliningrad. This is new installations here. You can kind of see it on the this small picture here. And that should indicate that they're really concerned that Russia's going to try and pull something from there. Though I was surprised by this one more than anything else today. Russia to start selling beer from North Korea. Are they really so strapped for even brewing facilities that they've got to import North Korean beer? Things are not going well for Russia, especially when you're having to do such fundamental items as booze from another nation. Poland and Lithuania are ready to train Ukrainian soldiers on a joint platform. They plan to use the base of the Lithuanian Polish-Ukrainian Brigade located in Poland for this training. So more assistance with trying to get more troops trained up for Ukraine. Here's the bit about Mongolia's energy dependence on Russia. They're just in a bad spot there. I don't need to go beat that particular horse. Let's go and go into the situation on the front lines. And we've got a little bit here. It's busy. That said, most of the activity is in Kursk, with the bridges, the pontoon bridges being destroyed on the same river along here. And this area basically cut off from actual Russia itself. This little area right here, let's see, let me get my little drawing stuff up here. Bear with me a second while I do that. The real surprise out of this whole thing is this area right here, just outside of Tyotkino. You can see the Ukrainians have taken some additional territory across the border here. Now, the whole area of this section right here is still quote unquote under Russian control. But basically, the Russians have no way to resupply from up here. That's cut off. And the Ukrainians have this whole area down here, so they can resupply their troops in here, and they can pin these guys in. So the Ukrainians are moving from the east and working from the west just a little bit to try and take this area here that is effectively cut off from Russian resupply. There's a lot of stuff that's going to have to go on in the meantime, but that's kind of the situation there, summarized really, really straightforward. The other area that is busy is this area just outside of Pokrovsk here. Here's Pokrovsk at the top here, still Ukrainian held. There have been additional advances all across the front lines from this area here. The thing is that the more Russia pushes in this area, the more I notice that that as they push, they've got these flanking areas right here that they're having to deal with, and it's gradually becoming a larger and larger salient. The question then becomes, can they push in, slice off this salient, and take these Russian forces into a cauldron? My gut feel is right now, no. I don't think the Ukrainians have the resources in position and ready to do so. That said, the Russians are penetrating deep into the best fortified areas outside of Pokrovsk at this point in time. If they manage to punch through and into Pokrovsk itself, it will be a major problem for logistics through the area. Right now, the main logistics area, obviously, is this highway going through the region. And, of course, this highway right here. If they can cut this off, that'll complicate logistics all across the front lines in this area badly. Let's see if we can get some more details going up here. Basically, the Russian source Wargonzo is confirming the information I just passed on. He does claim that the Russians are improving their position on the flanks at Chasiv Yar. Kursk region saying that their activity has decreased. This appears to be true, as Ukraine appears to be in a position where they're consolidating their positions. But overall, the situation is basically as I just said. You got the activity in Kursk, you got the activity in Pokrovsk. Other areas are getting kind of miscellaneous little actions, but no coordinated significant pushes in any of those areas. As Ozzy pointed out, even Russian mill bloggers are saying that Ukraine has 6 to 8 brigades in reserve and that Ukraine has a plan. We just don't know what it is yet, which is good. And if we knew it, so would Russia. There's reasons why I'm very careful about what I report. I've actually had people say, you're showing all this information that's obviously going to help the Russians. Most of the information I'm showing comes from Russian sources. So if I already know it, the Russians have long since known it. Just stating it for the record. And to be honest, if Ukraine wants me to shut up about something, all they got to do is reach out to my email. It's published. A Russian convoy attempted to advance in the area of Paraskovivka, and it was halted by artillery fire and FPV drones. A lot of men and equipment were eliminated in this particular attempt at an attack. Russians, however, have been bringing up more chemical weapons, mostly irritants from everything I've been able to see. And there's a limited amount of gas masks and similar facilities that are being provided. British forces have been supplying gas masks and training that could help counter it. Sorry, one of my cats, Pinto, is sitting right here on my desk now. So if you see something suddenly change in weird ways, you'll know why. Anyway, more chemical warfare going on, and we are basically ignoring that for now. The Russians have been a signatory against chemical warfare for a long time. Still, they are continuing to use it. Russians did manage to advance towards the center of Toretsk along the T-0516 highway going southwest. This looks like a main axis of attack, while no advances have been recorded south of Toretsk. Near Volodar, the situation is also tense, with Russian forces trying to encircle. No real reports of significant advances just yet, just some partial ones. Definitely tough situation there. Now let's go ahead and look at Kursk. I've got a bunch of stuff on Kursk. I always seem to right now. There was rumors of a Ukrainian breakout in Kursk. Now this is as of 2 days ago, which led to a friendly fire incident in the Russian rear area. A group of Russian militia fired at everything that moved, including a Russian unit that was moving along the Kursk-Logov supply route, injuring several. Ukrainian air assault forces managed to capture another modern T-80 BVM during their offensive in Kursk Oblast. Robbie sent me a video of them towing another Russian tank, so I'm always appreciative of that. Another pontoon bridge was destroyed by Ukrainian forces over the same river in Kursk Oblast. This was as of several days ago. The overall reports I'm seeing is that all of them have managed to be destroyed, and there are not currently any pontoon bridges crossing the same river. Anzac mercenaries confirmed why the flag of Gondor has been raised in Russia. No, it's just Ukrainian forces having some fun. This is actually from several days ago, so this is even old from this perspective. More information talking about the pontoon bridges being suppressed. The overall report is that there's about 3,000 Russian troops in this pocket that I talked about earlier, where they're not able to be resupplied because of the pontoon bridges being destroyed. So, bad situation for Russia there. A Russian serviceman is harshly criticizing residents of Kursk and Belgorod, accusing them of not only failing to support the military, but also exploiting them by raising food prices and housing prices at every opportunity. Well, what can you expect? This is the nature of the citizenry that you have cultivated. President Zelensky stated that they will hold the lands in Kursk for now, but didn't make any comment on whether there were plans to capture more. Russian State Duma Deputy Yevgeny Fedorov, who's normally a pretty big conspiracy theorist here, has now shifted his tone, warning about the dangers of propaganda, which claim that Ukrainians would be ousted from Kursk within a week or two. But in reality, entry to Kurchatov is now restricted and military actions are advancing further into Russia. Again, even the Russian propagandists are acknowledging that their propaganda is not accurate in this regard. And that's going to make it worse when they continue to advance bravely into areas farther and farther in Russian territory. Russian soldiers have noticed a significant superiority in FPV and Mavic drones for the Ukrainian side, but say they do have plenty of Lancet and Orlan and Geron in good numbers. But the Ukrainians are able to just use way more FPV drones than they can. So it's a challenging situation for Russia. A Russian serviceman spoke about his interactions with the Kursk Territorial Defense, and it's complete chaos. They're more likely to harm each other than Ukrainians. Some members are in a constant state of paralyzing panic, imagining Ukrainians everywhere and growing suspicious of their fellow Russians. Some of that's implanted by the Ukrainians because they've got plenty of people that are quite fluent in Russian, complete with accent. Then we already talked about him. I thought this article was really good about the basically the conscripts that have been captured in the Kursk region and their responses to the Kyiv Independent. I'm going to paste the article there. It's too long to review in this stream, but understand it's very, very good. A Russian man who switched sides to Ukraine in the liberated part of the Kursk region shared his thoughts on his new way of life, saying, "I want all of Russia to be like this without Putin." I'm not even going to play the video. Again, I'm just going to share the, because number one, it's not got any subtitles. But just want to share that with you. If you've got the proper language, you can go for it. Koronivo in Kursk region, there's been a lot of fighting around that area, but it remains in Russian hands. The situation there is getting rather dire, and the Russians seem to be really concerned about the situation there. It continues to be in their hands, though. However, never letting a bad situation go to waste, in the Kursk region, Russian soldiers are continuing to loot and exploit the local population. So on the one hand, we've got the guy complaining that they're raising prices on food and residences. And on the other hand, the Russians are just stealing what they want anyway. So the people there are like, hey, I got to get the money for anything, the stuff they're stealing already. And there was a slight advance just east of Koronivo. The situation there looks fairly static at the moment. It doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, but it looks static at the moment, except for this one advance just to the east of Koronivo. Now let's look at the situation around Pokrovsk. There have been a lot of arrivals, as in missiles landing in Mirnograd, and they're already closer around the city. 1700, the flight arrived in the eastern part of the city, near the bridge. And it's basically Russia's continuing to push in this direction significantly. They didn't want to transfer their reserve forces to Kursk from this direction, mostly moving forces from the Kharkiv direction. However, now, this is from Arctorehi, and he's got some good information here. They have redeployed several units from Pokrovsk to Kursk. This might be the real intention behind Kursk, and I think that's an accurate statement either way. They were trying to get Russia to have to redeploy forces from the active parts of the front to Kursk in order to counter the Ukrainian offensive. And it appears to have been partially successful in that regard. Now, he talks a lot more about the situation around Pokrovsk. It's a larger city than Bakhmut was, and it took months and huge losses for Russia to take Bakhmut. Doing the same in Pokrovsk would be a huge investment in men and materiel. Is that the plan? To make Russia try and take Pokrovsk building by building? I don't know. As Ozzy says, we don't know, so therefore the Russians don't know. And that's a good thing. Video of a large amount of destroyed Russian equipment near Pokrovsk from the 109th TRO. According to them, the Russians are suffering huge losses as they approach the front line, but there are so many of them that the Ukrainian soldiers can't keep up with the flow. And that's the problem. Meat assaults in the biggest waves they can. Russian ground forces have accelerated their advance towards the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk over the last 7 days. They are likely within 10 kilometers from the edge of the city. The rate of advance is likely to slow as Russian ground forces enter Pokrovsk's built-up areas. And they also talk about the key logistics hub that is there, etc., like that. Either way, the loss of the city would be a significant problem for Ukraine, as it is a key logistics hub in the area. If they can tie up a significant amount of Russian forces trying to take the city, though, that's going to be another wave of losses for Russia that they really can't sustain. As Ozzy states, maybe they're pulling back to better geography or setting a trap. Exactly. The Russians have occupied Mykhailovka, and the Ukrainians have repelled several attacks towards Soldova. There's a lot of resistance in this area as well. Overall, the Russians are making gradual progress, slightly more speed, as I think the Ukrainians have pulled back to more favorable territory or to better defensive lines. So there's been a spike in the amount of territory that Russia's been capturing. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. That's pretty much the front lines, but there is something interesting that's popped up in the last few days, namely thermite dispensing drones. So a Ukrainian drone is showering molten thermite on a Russian-held tree line. And this appears to be more common than you would expect, because here's another Ukrainian drone dropping molten thermite on a Russian-held tree line, setting this one ablaze. Now, we are currently in September. Things are still pretty green. So while it will cause some fires, it's probably not going to, well, hold off on that thought for a moment. There will be fires. In a few months, there will be enormous fires because a lot of this area. Oh, did you see that explosion there? Probably caught something in there, a Russian small, some weaponry or something like that. So these thermite drones seem to be this new technique that Ukraine is using to burn the Russians out of these tree lines and put them into open territory again. And a Russian on open territory is an easy target. They're calling these new drones Dragon, and it can create a fire rain that can cause ammunition explosions, which is what we saw in one of those videos. So interesting to see this new technique that they're using. Anything that's going to get the Russians out, I suppose, is the best way to say it. Now, this next section, I'm going to give you some heads up. Might be a little bit disturbing. There's nothing terribly graphical in it, but I put it under a tab that I'm calling the human cost. Russian forces have done a double strike on civilians in Ukraine, in this case, Lviv. These double tap strikes are they hit a location with guided weaponry. They wait half an hour for first responders to arrive, maybe an hour, to get in the middle of rescue operations and putting out the fire. Then they hit it again with another round of missiles. This is the double tap. If you look closely at this photo, you'll see a beautiful family. As of last night, the only one alive in this photo is this man right here. He lost his wife and 3 daughters. Here he is. That's what he looks like now. Here he is immediately after being comforted by rescuers. This is the attack in Lviv. I got 3 daughters of my own and a wonderful wife. I have 3 sons as well. They're adult sons now. They still live at home, but that's another story. I can only imagine how devastating this would be for this man. The human cost. Russia, Vladimir Putin is willing to inflict horrendous human cost, all in pursuit of his aggressive war. As Maria Avdiva states, I've lost count of how many kids and adults have been killed. Every night we wake up to more missiles hitting another Ukrainian city. Everyone in Ukraine is a target unless we get more help and the right to strike back. From Alexandra Povoroznik, I'll be up front with you guys and say something deeply personal. I have always felt it in my bones that Ukraine would win. I was so confident that I had my second child last spring amid the missile strikes and drone attacks. Today, I am genuinely afraid the world wants us to lose. We have some weapons to strike back and protect our people. We have the bravest, strongest soldiers doing their best to protect us. But our allies won't do what's fully within their power to do any second. They won't let us strike onto Russian soil. For the first time since spring 2022, I'm deeply, deeply horrified. Once again, I feel the world at large simply doesn't care whether we live or die. I feel like all they want to do is just get back to business as usual with Russia. Make no mistake, I still know we'll win sooner or later. The only way this war will end is if Russia is defeated and demilitarized. But how many Ukrainians are going to have to die before the world lets us win? And this attitude right here, the world at large simply doesn't care whether we live or die, is alive and well and thriving in Western nations. I have had discussions with men who have claimed nothing that happens in eastern Ukraine affects us here in the United States. They have said with a straight face that all those Ukrainians shouldn't have to die, and they are absolutely correct in that regard. They wouldn't have to die if Russia would just leave. But there are things that are worth fighting for. Freedom is worth fighting for. Family is worth fighting for. And to just roll over and take it, I say no. These people, Ukrainians, say no. They will not roll over. They will not simply surrender themselves to the evil. Those who say that nothing happens in Ukraine affects them, as Ozzy states, they're Chamberlains. Yes, they are. Lots of ambulances were responding all over the city last night in Lviv, as the tremendous human cost is paid in blood by the hapless, helpless, and those who cannot fight back. Here's Roman Ivan, a 24-year-old Ukrainian defender who lost his eyesight and arm as a result of a grenade explosion in his sector. His wife provided him with medical assistance until the ambulance arrived. Despite the grim prognosis, Ivan came out of the coma after being treated in several healthcare facilities. Tatiana and Ivan never left their positive attitude and optimism. They joke, laugh, and just keep on living. These are the powerful people, the strength that are having to suffer this cost, the human cost. From defense of Ukraine, none of these men and women were born for war. And see little children who've now grown up to serve, who have written a check, in this case to Ukraine, for everything up to and including their lives to defend and protect. We say this often in the United States. These people live it. That's the toughest part of today's stream. So thank you for sticking through that. Let's do a little bit lighter stuff right here. How about a nice close shave for this guy right in front of that helicopter? That is some serious aerial work right there, flying that low to the ground. And I thought this was hilarious. The longest sniper rifle in service with the Ukrainian military. That thing's enormous. Fires a 14.5 millimeter caliber. That's not a Western caliber typically. That's a Russian caliber. But look at the length of that thing. Easily with its with everything involved. I think that's a suppressor on the end. Taller by than that man by a good 2, even 3 feet. And we'll end off with Life Has a Way. And no, I'm not talking about Jurassic Park. In the middle of this destroyed building right here, destroyed home, this cat is surviving with her kittens, given birth in the middle of this war. And if that cat can have that type of courage, if these Ukrainians can have this will to survive, thrive, and be free, then surely we can give them what they need to get through. That's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. Ozzy, Lucille, Jerry, Robbie, Al, thank you all. I really appreciate you being here. Sorry for the waterworks a little bit here, but I want you to know that I appreciate every single one of you. You make the difference. And we talk about it in the safety of our homes. It's what I can do. It's everything I can do. But I want you to know that I appreciate you for being here for it. You all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.